Okay, so let's get started. And if you attended my talk yesterday when I said most of the discussions about the what and the how and the when and how much do not make too much sense if you don't know anything about the why you're doing architectural work in the first place. I will be talking about the when and how much in this talk. And okay, rest assured, I've aligned it with the stuff that I talked about yesterday. So much up front. For those of you who didn't attend my talk yesterday, my name is Uwe Friedrichsen. I work for a company called Concentric. If you want to know more about them, ask my colleagues over there, but that's a different story. And if you want to find me on the internet, usually my handle, Ufried, is working quite nicely, for instance, on Twitter or on SpeakerDeck or for my own blog and so on. And if you have any questions that come to your mind, maybe tomorrow or something, reach out to me on Twitter, for instance. And I will be happy to try to answer them. I cannot always promise an answer, but at least I try. Okay, when to do what and how much? I mean, that's one of the big discussions, not only in the Agile community. And in most of these discussions, I see, and the most of the advice here is, do it this way, or do it that way. So big design up front is bad. Is it? Or you always have to reiterate and do evolutionary stuff and so on. And do I? And well, you might think as another, it depends. And yeah, it depends in a little bit, but in the end, you will understand what we can do to go beyond that. It depends. Because again, if we talk about architectural work, it's always completely or tightly related to the software development approach we're using. So we can't look at architectural work completely detached from the software development approach we're using. And as I said before, problem that I usually see is that people only come from one perspective, say as it is always looking for this one size fits all. This is how you develop software. And it's exactly like that, and it's nothing else exists. And it's because of that, this is exactly how you have to do architectural work or don't do architectural work and all that stuff. And I don't think that this idea makes too much sense, this one size fits all. I mean, if we go past into the history, we came from this waterfall, all the things, so we had this one size fits all in few variants, and waterfall things, we didn't like it. We know waterfall is bad, doesn't work well in quite some context. So we complained a lot, and it's too limited, it's too uniform, it's for our heterogeneous demands, and so on. So we need something that adapts better to our needs. And then enter Agile. We went Agile. Great. I mean, quite often it looks a little bit more like that in the companies I'm working with. I will come back to that in a minute, but still it's Agile. It's Agile, and well, we're Agile all the things. So we love it, and okay, it doesn't work quite well in quite some context, but still we don't complain about that, and instead we try to squeeze everything in so that it somehow all these things work with this Agile thing in some odd way, and because we're Agile, period. And so we just created the next one size fits all. So from one size fits all to the next one size fits all. I personally don't think that this is the best thing to do. So let's try to kill that one size fits all a little bit. And from what I've seen and learned, I think a good thing to use to kill that one-size-fits-all dogma is talking about uncertainty. Maybe you have heard about this VUCA, so volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, which are uncertainty drivers on the real world. And what I'm talking about here is decision uncertainty. What's next? What should I do now? What's the next thing I should do? And if I have uncertainty about what's the next right thing to do, that's what I'm talking about. It comprises all of this VUCA stuff and a lot of more things. I will talk about that in a few minutes. But The key point is understanding what uncertainty does with us. So let's start with certainty. So uncertainty-driven value prediction model. On the one hand, we have what we do, the effort we spend, the work we do, the units we produce, or in Agile speak, the output. On the other hand, we have the value we create, the acceptance of the customer, the units sold, or the outcome, in Agile speak again. And if we're honest, we're looking for that, because that's where the money is made, where customer satisfaction is built and all that stuff. This is just needed to create that. We have just a little problem. This part is externally controlled. These are our consumers, our customers, our users who decide about that. We don't decide about that. We can only control what we're doing. We can't control that over there. If we have certainty, then we can, because we have a linear relation. So much output results in so much outcome. And that's why I also call that the industrial value prediction model. Because if you take away all the layers from the industrial markets, industrial production models, you come to an underlying assumption. Demand is a lot bigger than supply. That's the underlying assumption. Even if it wasn't true anymore, people always acted in that way. Demand is a lot bigger than supply. Because in that situation, if you have a lot of demand and you're not completely dumb, the stuff that you create will be bought. So control what you build and you control the sales. Control what you do and you control the satisfaction. So linear relation, certainty. So we can focus on that stuff. And that's sufficient for us to create value. Focus on that. Looks familiar? Yeah, many companies are still running that way. They're trying to control that stuff, not that stuff. Now let's enter uncertainty. Uncertainty is a different game. I mean, we're still interested in that one over there, because that's where the value, the money is made. And the influencing factors are unfortunately outside our control. We can't predict upfront anymore how our customers are going to respond to what we're doing. I mean, even the customers cannot do that. They can only tell you after the fact. There's a lot of psychology involved here, but they can't tell you upfront what they want. If you ask them, so we are back in the dilemma which Henry Ford nicely coined in the way, if I would ask my customers what they want, they would say faster horses. They would never say, I want to have a car. So, and it's a dilemma we're facing, and we can't control that stuff. And now, for instance, if we go into a post-industrial market where demand and supply ratio reversed, so that there's a lot more supply than demand. Sounds familiar? Yes, most markets these days are like that. Customers do not simply buy because we do something. They only buy if it fits their needs, and they don't know if it fits their needs until they see it. So we can only measure after the fact if it's good or not, what we've done. Everything else, I mean, if you attended the talk by Randy Shoup yesterday morning, the keynote, he said 1/3 of the guesses, basically, of the things that were done created value, and the rest of the stuff didn't create any value. And 1/3 is still a good measure. That's excellent product managers. I would say the average will be 10 to 15% from the stuff we're doing here is creating value over there. So if you have uncertainty, it breaks our linear relation between effort and value. So we don't know it. And all the means over there, all our plan-based approaches, going down the drain. They don't help us. I mean, we still look a little bit for efficiency, but it doesn't help us to maximize the value we create. So, as I said, if I do something here, 3 things can happen. We can add value. Great, value-adding performance, that's what we want to have. Or it's an idle performance, so nobody cares. We just wasted money. Or the worst thing, value-reducing performance, we destroyed value. So customers dislike it. Customers go away because we just screwed it up. And so we start spend money to destroy value, the worst thing we can do. And we have no idea under uncertainty until we see it, until the customers gives us feedback with their feet. So yeah, and there's also support performance, but in the literature, but we don't need it here. So summing up, understanding uncertainty, it means you cannot predict the value you create anymore upfront from what you're doing. So your value optimization is no longer with these plan-based approaches, produce as much as possible, as cost efficiently as possible. The approach is, as I said, first part, do not maximize value by optimizing efficiency of your efforts, so cost efficiency, but by detecting and cutting idle and value-reducing performance, the ones that we don't want, as early as possible. And this leads to a very different approach if you want to be successful. Because now we don't have a requirement on Epic or something like that. We have an hypothesis. Oh, I think that this will be a very smart thing. Our customers will love that. And how do I figure out if our customers will love it? Okay, our revenue will grow by 10%, by 15%, or our customer base will grow, or whatever. You name it. Some measure. And then, here's the magical part, you break it down in a series of very small questions. So, and by the way, this is the magic, it's the complicated part. What's the smallest thing I can do to figure that out? If you go to most companies I've seen, say, the product manager saying, well, no, I have to release the whole Epic because otherwise our customers will not like it and we have to build it all together. And so 1 million, 9 or 12 months, and to get feedback. Find a small question that you can ask and immediately get feedback and see, okay, I've got 10 more customers going with that, or a little bit of money, or some positive feedback, or whatever. By the way, if you're a product manager and you know how to do that, you're a sought person, a really wanted person, because people who really know how to do that are rare. So, and then you measure and see, okay, I don't spend the $1 million, I maybe spend $20,000 or 10,000 or something like that. So you ask this small question, not in 12 months, but in a week or two. Oh, that was a good response, so let's move on with that. Oh, they didn't like it. And maybe ask the wrong question, spend another 10,000 and another 20,000. No, I asked 3 questions and they still don't like it. So I spent $50,000 and I figure out, okay, maybe my original idea wasn't that good. So, hey, I just saved the company $950,000 for doing better things. Great idea. But that's a very different approach. And this approach requires a lot of feedback from the market, from our consumers, from our customers, from our users. So, very different. To wrap that section up about uncertainty, the sources, I already talked about post-industrial markets. There are also other sources here. We talked about this VUCA world, so volatility, ambiguity of signals, and volatility of markets, and then the complexity of context of tasks that you cannot predict anymore how these things will interact and affect each other on the business side and on the IT side. Also digital transformation, which is, digital information in its sentence simply means business IT are the same thing. Business IT are the same side of the same coin. And on the other side of the coin is the market. So if you're still talking about business IT alignment, where have you been the last 20 years? Okay, I still know a lot of managers talking about business IT alignment. I'm polite enough not to ask them that question immediately. I only do that on conference talks. They don't like these kind of questions. But also going for the first wave of digital transformation was digitizing the business processes in the background. And then the second wave, that started 40, 50 years ago, the second wave was something like digitizing the communication interface between the users, users or consumers, and our companies, so e-commerce, and later on mobile phones. And the third wave now is going with API-based business and platforms and so on. So no users involved anymore, systems talking to systems, whole revenue streams just going through APIs. It completely changed the dynamics of of the business, not only the IT. So it's the same thing, and people are struggling. It creates a lot of uncertainty because they don't know how to handle it, what's the right thing, also disruptive technologies and all that stuff. Okay, uncertainty. We talked enough about uncertainty now. I think you got the image, the idea. With that, I think we have something to kill the one-size-fits-all dogma and go post-agile. Maybe we will call this conference next year then post-agile and architecture. I don't know. Probably not, but still. What we actually have here is not that one thing is good and the other thing is bad, but we actually have a spectrum aligned with certainty to uncertainty. The more certainty we have in the task we're trying to accomplish, the more we can go with plan-based approaches. It's perfectly fine to have a waterfall if you have some new banking law which says, okay, you have to document a few processes over here. If you do this kind of business, you have to document it in the following way. I mean, figure out the systems which you use for doing this kind of business, add that stuff. So yeah, analyze, plan, design, implement, test, roll out, you're done. There's no uncertainty. There's no question left. You don't need any feedback for that. On the other hand, if you just try to innovate over there and have no clue what you still want to do and how the market's going to respond, you will need to have a lot of feedback, a lot of these cycles in there. So a lot of small steps, quick feedback cycles, all that stuff over there. And it's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. It's not just one thing. And we could now organize our software development approaches in here and then organize the architectural development approaches in there. There's just one thing I have to mention before I can put the software development approach in here. Because if people look at that image, say, yeah, it's cool, but over there on the right side, that's Agile, isn't it? Yeah, it's Agile. And, well, in theory, yes. Agile started up to exactly tackle this kind of uncertainty. That's what they figured out. In some way, in some empirical way, the people 20, 25 years ago figured out, okay, these plan-based things don't work too well anymore in IT for many reasons. We have so much uncertainty. We need to go with more feedback, with quicker feedback. But the reality in most companies I still see who call themselves Agile is they still have these long backlogs, and before the last user story is not implemented, it will not see the light of the market, and we don't want to get any feedback from any consumer or customer out there because, bad things could happen. So it's still plan-based, and you still have the budgeting processes up front, and the project plannings, and the project portfolio planning, and the prioritization, and all these things, and it's just called, in the middle then some unfortunate programmers, developers just sprint like hell a little bit, measured their velocity, which is just improving their performance because Jeff Sutherland said, okay, if you're going Scrum, then you get more productive by 300%. So yeah, I pay them $50,000 bucks per year and I get three times the output from them. Everything will be great. So that's the typical Agile implementation story that I see in most companies. They call themselves Agile, but they're mere cargo cults. So Agile, at least the enterprise Agile, as implemented in most companies, is not essential uncertainty. This getting fast feedback from the market, shortening the feedback cycles through the IT value chain. I've got a business idea, let's ship it out as fast as possible to collect feedback from the users, to learn from them how to improve. So how can I go from 12 months to 1 month to 1 week to 1 day to intradaily? That's not what we see in most situations. We see a lot of ceremony, plannings and doing so, but not that. Okay, so I have to mention that because otherwise the next slide doesn't make a lot of sense. From certainty to uncertainty. Very simple. We have here, the first category is cost-based approaches. So they try to maximize efficiency or repeatability. Waterfall, V model, even safe. I mean, Don't get me wrong about safe. It might have a value for some companies, but usually the most safe implementation I've seen is, oh, great, we can call ourselves Agile without changing anything. That's what safe is usually for. There's so many roles in there. We find a role for everyone still there, and nobody needs to change. Okay, they get their training, which goes in here and out there, and then they continue doing what they ever did. That's safe in a nutshell, basically, which is okay for me. I don't struggle with that a lot. But if anybody comes along and says, yeah, with Agile, we're doing safe, I say, okay, note to myself, not Agile. Yeah. Then we have this enterprise Agile, so the typical Scrum and Less and stuff like that. So they can absorb a little bit more of uncertainty. Over here, this is great, for instance, as I said, some new legal regulation. So like I have to implement something else because banking laws came along and say, yeah, I have to do this report there or this documentation over here, or some system runs into end of life cycle. I mean, the technology goes out of life cycle, and I wanted to replace it with a new technology. The system is there, the source code is there, you can see it running. Everything's there, no uncertainty in there. Maybe you have no clue how a system's running, but that's homework not done. That's not uncertainty. It's a different story. Maybe not your homework, but it's homework from someone else, but it's simply a homework not done. That's not uncertainty. Everything's there what you need. Here was something like, okay, you're a telecommunications company and you want to release new tariff plans. So yeah, it's a bit of uncertainty, but you're still quite in well-known waters, and they're quite safe, these waters. Not that safe, the other safe. So it's still working quite nicely, but yeah, you can absorb a little bit. And usually it's used for improving deficiencies in internal communication paths. So you still self-occupied companies like trying to optimize for, their broken communication processes. That really helps a little bit. If you go over there, the next part, here you really get a lot of uncertainty. For instance, you try to address a completely new customer group or create a completely new touch point. You don't know really how it works, but you evolve from an existing business model, basically. And this is then, or you evolve your business model in some way, but you come from a known point. But you have quite a lot of uncertainty. Here you need feedback. So that's where you go for flow ideas like DevOps or Lean, so the original DevOps idea. I mean, the original DevOps idea was about how can I shorten the time through my IT value chain from a business idea down out to the customer and collect feedback. How quick can I go? That's what DevOps is about in the original meaning. Before it came this, I need a continuous delivery tool chain and a little bit of Kubernetes. And can we talk about tools now? Which it somehow went into. These tools are all great and useful, but it's a different discussion, most definitely. But whenever something becomes complicated, we go into tools in this domain. Okay. And then, even more feedback. Here's more like the startup domain. If we do something really novel and we still have no idea, do the customers want that? So I have a new idea. I want to do something radical new in there. And there's something, for instance, Fred George has this idea of developer anarchy, which is a quite controlled approach, by the way. And said, okay, one developer, one business expert, sit down and code very short parts of software and just release them to the system and see how it responds. Doesn't make sense in all contexts, but it's more like iterating in minutes and learning in minutes instead of hours or days or weeks or months or something like that. So very fast feedback. And here, we need to innovate. Please don't touch the keyboard. That's too early for software. Okay, and we don't need to organize it exactly like that. So if you prefer a different organization, but it's more like you have different approaches. There's not one approach, there are different ones. And you can, as I said, you can also find different nuances for yourself. It's perfectly fine, but going from very plan-based to very iterative and feedback-driven. All right. Is that sufficient to sort our architectural approach into? There's one more thing I would like to add, and don't be confused because it's Apple event today, so I'm not going to announce the iPhone 14 now. It's something different. It will be later, and someone else will do that. So what I will talk about here is, or briefly mention, is the life cycle of the system. We could talk a lot about that, but let's keep it short here. I mean, life cycle of system, very simplified, is we start with an empty state. Repository is empty. And we do a change, we commit it, we have a new state, hopefully it's running software, so we have some automation and stuff like in there, and we do and do and do, and so on, until we eventually get to the first release, and then release the software. And with Agile, it should be faster, as I said, quite often it is not, but that's a different issue. And then we go on for a long time, usually 10, 15, 20 years or longer. I just did an architectural review for an insurance company, and their oldest systems were gone into production in 1972. I was 6 years old then. And quite some of you weren't born then, I think. So they're running for a long time, quite often, these systems. And then eventually there will be the last change, and the system will be retired. So. And the problem that we see quite often if we talk about architectural work is that most of the time people only look for this first part, this until going live. Problem is that more than 80% of the money, the cost, the effort of all the stuff is over here. Usually in these days, more than 90% of the money in the costs. And if anybody attended my talk yesterday and remember the first definition, we try to minimize the overall cost across the life cycle in some way with architectural work. Which in short means, we have to go along and always look, are we still on the right track? Did something change? Did it change from the exterior side internally or something? Is the implementation, does it still fit the architecture? Does the architecture still fit the constraints, the demands, the needs from the outside? And all these things can change. Fitness functions are a great part to figure out if the implementation still fits the architecture. The other part, sometimes it works with fitness functions, sometimes you have to do it more manually to figure that out, like scenario-based evaluations and other things. Okay. And now, finally, we have everything in place we need to say how to organize our architectural work, when to do the work, and how much to do. Let's start with the cost-based approach. I would call that the BDUF, the big design up front. It's perfectly okay over there because, again, no uncertainty. Just do your design, implement it, test it, release it, and you're done. If you do your homework, you're done. You can still release it incrementally if you like to, and so on. But no feedback required, really. So you do the complete design, maybe a few weeks or something like that. You implement it, no changes required, and okay, because later, if it's in maintenance mode, the system, things will change, things will evolve in some way, but quite rarely you can reassess that. So like the scenario-based software evaluation approaches like ATAM or SAM or CBAM or a lightweight variant of that would be fine, day or something. If you more go to the enterprise Agile, I usually see that what quite useful there is, I call it a decent design up front, and then going on. So maybe if you have a project which will be running this backlog for 9 months or a year or something like that, say, a few workshops, 3 days, 4 days, maybe 5 days. It's sufficient to get most of the things arranged here because, again, most of the things are known already. And then once in a while, every month or two, you revisit your architectural decisions because you learn something again and so on. There's no customer out there. There's no production system. There's nothing out there. So, you only can internally revisit that stuff. And that's okay. And for a few hours, you go back to that and say, is it still okay? And I know we have to abrupt a little bit here and there. And then assessment is mostly like that. You can do it a little bit more often, maybe, depending how you do the maintenance over there. quite often it's still the same maintenance as there in many companies. So even if they're agile, but it's just their project teams, but the maintenance team is not agile, they're ticket-driven or something like that. Flow is a very different story. You start with just enough design up front because you know that there's a lot of stuff you don't know yet. That's a completely different story. So you just do a quick pass, a few hours a day. One day, what's a reasonable way to start with? We knew a few things, but not enough. So let's do a quick sketch of the architecture that we have some basis to work with. And then, actually, there's no differentiation between project and maintenance mode. So you always reiterate. That's really the sweet spot of this evolutionary architecture approaches that we heard about from Rebecca and Pat. So if you're over here, that's great. So just going along every few weeks and saying, okay, now and adopted it. Feedback-driven is, again, minimal agreement. So if you really go in the startup mode, just enough agreement to start working. For instance, Fred George, but he works in a very specific domain, so please don't try that at home or in your company. Usually doesn't make sense in most contexts, but in this context, it really makes a lot of sense. We have a message bus, and then we really try very small microservices, so very, very small, 10 lines of code, 20 lines of code, maybe 50 lines of code, and we try to get them out within a few minutes or an hour or two or something, and then plug it in, submit events, subscribe to events, and see what happens, and so on. And so we plug them in and out as we like. So minimal agreement. And usually not very good for long-running systems. And over here, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The key point, again, is, and that's what I meant with the it depends or beyond it depends, is if you look at that, depending on the degree of uncertainty that we have, here we have bigger design up front to basically no design up front. It depends on that. What makes sense, the task that you have at hand, what the problem that you try to solve. You always go then also, you go more into a continuous learning of architecture instead of having it quite rigid in the beginning. Again, depending on the task. There are tasks out there where it's perfectly fine to go with a big design up front. And also, you see the importance in, so the rigidness of the architecture becomes less and less over there until over here, basically we're not really interested in architecture a lot. So we're just interested in feedback. So who cares about quality? We throw the things away anyway. So whatever does the trick is enough. Okay, so we have this. Anything else which influences our architectural work? Besides certainly uncertainty and thinking about life cycle, there are always things that will come into our way. Though don't take it as a dogma, take it as an idea. For instance, you could run in some kind of time and budget constraints which will force you to do it a little bit different than you ideally would do it. Or the availability of people. For instance, I had once a project where I wanted to settle some ideas of the architecture a lot later, doing just very little design in the beginning, and then I just learned that some of the key players left the company at the end of the month. Okay, I did a lot of architectural work in the very beginning because otherwise all the key players who knew about the stuff what was running in there would have been gone. So quick schedule replanning. And skills, knowledge, experience of the people involved. You cannot take the people who did this kind of systems for 20 years and put them over there immediately. They will drown. The other way around too. It doesn't make too much sense. And the risk of the resulting system, for instance, like harm for human lives, maybe a few more checks and controls that you want to build in before you go live and so on. So there can be some things. But overall, to wrap that up, this idea that I wanted to bring across is there is not one size fits all, the right way of doing architecture, when to do what. Try to align it with uncertainty. Try to figure out what task do you try to solve? How much experience does your organization have with that? How close it's to what you have done before, and so on? All these kinds of questions. Is there some are there some technology risks? Are you trying to use very new technology that you have no clue about, and so on and so on? And then decide about your approach and embed your architectural work in there, because you cannot separate the architectural work from the software development approach. So it's like fighting against Conway's law. You can do it, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And think about life cycle. Again, as I said yesterday, most of the music happens after the system went live. That's where the effort lies. Think about that and also revisit your architecture once in a while. And finally, I hope I successfully killed the one-size-fits-all dogma. And we're ready to go post-Agile. So, thanks a lot for your time, and now I'm ready for taking questions.
Thank you, Uwe. And we indeed do have questions. How to tackle the problem if the pile of homework not done is really large?
You mean the regular problem with every bigger company? Well, that's a complicated one, which is not necessarily related to architectural work, to be honest. We often have the situation that so much knowledge is lost just for the sake of efficiency. And I think there's no way around that. If you have a task at hand, you have to do the homework. Usually, if you're living in a company where you have this much depth and this much homework not done, you're not in the position simply to change it overnight. So maybe if you're really lucky, you have a really smart boss, you can reserve, say, 5% of the cycles of the money or 10% of the money. And let's say, what's the most painful thing that we want to clean up a little bit and bits of structure in? If you're not that lucky, you have to wait until that rework is coming and come up with a ridiculously high estimation and say, well, sorry, that's the depth for the last 20 years of homework not done. And hopefully you survive the discussion. But there's no easy answer to that.
Here's another one. Aren't we always working under uncertainty? Even a law that seems to be set in stone could be changed before we ship its implementation in our software.
Or we're running in uncertainty. The key point, I think, is not to come up with that, I'm always running under uncertainties, but to be honest about how much essential uncertainty is. Do I really need to have feedback? I mean, even if the law changes, it's okay, but you don't need any feedback from the outside for that, to figure that out. I mean, you still build your system, and then, eventually your lawyers come along saying, oh, well, okay, there was this other court who said that it has to interpret it in this way, but it's just a change of schedule. It's still working with waterfall, saying, okay, stop the line here, and now let's reset things, let's reevaluate how this changed the requirements and go through it again. So, there's always a little bit of uncertainty involved, but the point for me is that honesty, do I really have actual essential uncertainty, which is this, that I need feedback to move forward, or can I go more plan-based? Because, again, there's a spectrum in there.
And looking at the watch, let's have the last one. Is the feedback approach maintainable in the long run, or does the architecture become so tangled that it's no longer maintainable?
Is the feedback approach maintainable in the long run? I would say most definitely yes, because there are some companies out there who prove that it is. And they successfully proved it. I mean, it's like with documenting software a little bit. It's also a lot about discipline, or like with a well-structured monolith. It's a bit about discipline of that. So, we have to revisit then. We have to be bold, making decisions. We have to be you have to make decisions about that and not just slip it. So we have to look into the things. But yeah, I think this is absolutely possible. I mean, we learn along the way, we adopt along the way. There are a lot of practices also, many people and other speakers in other talks talked about that, how we can make sure that we are able to keep our architecture in some way, changeable, flexible. And there are some heuristics out there. I think, it's possible.
Uwe Friedrichsen, thank you so much.